All right, continuing on with Pax Britannica. We are on the 1896 turn. Looks like the US and Japan are going to get some merchant fleets this turn. Currently, I just did the random events for this phase, so I can actually move the phase marker up to admin, which will be filling out the spreadsheets. Always the most exciting part of the game. Let's see, changes from last time. There have been unrest events in some of these controlled areas, and just looking at Africa here, the controlled areas are the blue areas, and basically these are areas that have their own, they're their own countries at this point. Basically, they're not, tribal lands or something like that. These are national, entities with a national identity that have, diplomatic relations with other countries and with Europe. So the English, there was unrest in the Transvaal, and as you can see, the Transvaal has 15 strength points. So it is, compared to most of these zones, and these organized areas or controlled areas are going to have usually higher military capabilities than, for example, the unorganized areas, because these are, again, kind of national entities that may have standing armies and things like that. So this was no joke. Unrest here was no joke for Britain to squelch if they wanted to put a control marker down, which they need to do in order to get their north-south. Now they could have, not worried about that at all, of unrest coming here eventually, and they may have had to, and they would have had to put a control marker in Botswanaland or Sud-West Africa. They got lucky and unrest happened here, and since they had, a control marker in an adjacent space in South Africa here, they were able to send full armies here. They sent 30 points of strength to take the Transvaal and put a control marker down there. So that gets them a control marker in a fairly valuable province for $7. A control marker for $7 per turn income zone. A control marker will make you 18, or protectorate marker will make you $18 a turn. So it's a pretty good deal for them. It'll be less of a good deal. Well, I guess they don't have to go here. They've already got their north-south. Now they just need to work out the co-dominion with France. France will probably be very amenable to that and request a co-dominion in the Sudan, and that will give both Britain and France the cross Africa bonuses. France with the east to or west to east path across France. At this point, they probably need to go here. Again, they'll leave this probably towards the end of the game, depending on if there's unrest at some point in Tripoli, and France can negotiate their way into a control marker there. And the biggest resistor to that would probably be Italy. Britain already knows that France is going for this east-west route and can get it. Now Britain, if they wanted to thwart France, could try and place a marker here, but Britain wants France's cooperation in order to get a co-dominion there in Egypt. The other thing Britain could do is go to war with France. Problem for Britain there is that France has a defensive treaty with Russia, and you can see where that leads. The whole point of the game is to avoid World War I, and it was this sort of wars between great powers that were entangled in alliances that caused World War I to begin with. So the more likely path will be for France and Britain to work out some kind of deal to get co-dominions here, and France will either go here to get their co-dominion up to connecting to Egypt, or they will get lucky and get the unrest in Tripoli and manage to work out getting a control marker here. If Italy is the only power interested in thwarting this, it's unlikely anybody's going to come to their aid, again, because of France's treaty with Russia. This is why one of the other big things that happened since my last video here is Anatolia, which is obviously one of the key provinces of the Ottoman Empire, the other being Tripoli and Kuwait over here. Anatolia went into unrest, and so Russia immediately pounced on that. You know, this has been the long Russian dream to control Constantinople and the gateway to the Black Sea and be their entree into the Mediterranean and not be blocked by the Ottomans. So this was the deepest of Russian desires, was to control Anatolia. Obviously, for victory point purposes, Italy, which at the time had an influence marker here in Anatolia, was obviously also very concerned because this is one of the spaces that if no other power has a control marker at the end of the turn, Italy will get whatever it is, an extra 15 points. It is, yeah, if no power other than Italy has a control marker in Anatolia, Egypt, Greece, or Tripoli, that would be 10 points. And so obviously that would be contingent upon Italy getting a control marker in one of these zones. And as you can see, like Anatolia and Tripoli are both part of the Ottoman Empire, so you can't just establish a control marker there. There has to be unrest first. Let's see, Egypt, Greece, and Tripoli. Oh, Egypt is the other one, but France muscled Italy out of that. So, you know, the potential, and I think Italy was holding out hope that France would be kicked out of Egypt by Britain, perhaps, not realizing the potential for a co-dominion trade for between France and Britain there. So Italy's kind of already hosed on their extra 10-point award for keeping other countries from having control markers on these Mediterranean adjacent spaces. So there's not really anything Italy can do now. They ended up backing down from Russia because, again, had Italy tried to force things with Russia, that throws them into a potential conflict with France because of France and Russia's defensive pact treaty. And Italy does not have the navy or the army capabilities to deal with Russia and France both. So Italy just ended up downgrading their influence marker to an interest marker. And then the Austria-Hungary, which took advantage of the Serbian unrest early in the game to put a control marker down in Serbia, which is adjacent to Anatolia, has thrown an interest marker in there as well. So, other countries looking to take advantage of a fairly decent money-wise zone in Anatolia. So that was the other big control change in terms of actual organized areas or, national areas, the blue or the purple spaces. There is some doings over here. This just happened here in the Middle East. Unrest in Persia on the last turn. Britain immediately pounced on that. Russia could have looked to challenge Britain there, and been in a position of strength. Russia still focused on getting Anatolia, and they had to, given that the Anatolia strength is 20, they had to send 40 of their troops there. And Russia has a large standing army, and I built some more just to give them the more flexibility, because they have that rule requirement that says they need to maintain 30 strength points in either Russia or Anatolia. I don't know, a number of these European provinces. They have to basically maintain a large European garrison. So the idea being that they can't send all their army off to fight against Japan for control of Korea or potential Chinese Empire areas. It keeps Russia from getting too frisky in the Far East, basically, is what it's for. But Russia was more interested in Anatolia than Persia. That left the window open for England to seize on the unrest in Persia and put a control marker down there, which gives them not a particularly valuable zone. At $4, you're making, well, a protectorate is the most profitable thing to have on a 4 economic value zone. You're making $6 a turn on that. So, it was just a jump for Britain to get some quick cash. think I moved too many. There was 3 strength points there. I think I moved too many British troops in. I think I moved 3 3s in. I really only needed 2 3s, probably, because at a 2-to-1 advantage, even if there had been an exchange. Yeah, I should have only moved 6 in. Even had there been an exchange, the Brits only would have lost 1 unit. They still would have won the zone. So that was a mistake on my part. Russia did move down into Afghanistan. Afghanistan is really, it's weird. I don't know why anybody would want to try and control Afghanistan. You gotta kill a 10 strength point army there for only $2, and a $2 zone loses you money on everything but interest. So it's funny. This was where the Great Game was, and I guess because it unlocks access to India for Russia, hence the Great Game between Britain and Russia. But Britain will be sure to keep a close eye on any Russian attempts to move into, there's Baluchistan there, into these Middle Eastern or Indian zones. So taking Persia was a big advantage for Britain in policing control of that area. I think I also had Russia put an interest down here in Kuwait. And then Africa, pencils in the way. France did put a control marker down for Madagascar. More German expansion. They've got control markers here in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanganyika. Over in the Americas, just a little more interest in Brazil, just because it's an expensive place. France has some influence here. The United States has expanded down into Chile. One of their merchant fleets. Initially, the U.S. only has merchant fleets in the Caribbean and the North Pacific. They've expanded now into the South Pacific, which gives them access to all of the coastal South America zones, which will be good for a few bucks. And they have expanded influence into Panama, hoping for that unrest that will allow them to put a control marker down there and build the Panama Canal. Let's see. Britain expanded one of their merchant fleets into the North Pacific. There's very few places left for the British to go. I think the North and South Pacific are about it. Oh, and the Baltic and the Black Sea. But those are worthless. At least for Britain, there's nothing really they can exploit on either of those zones. Other more major happenings here in Oceania. Germany, Japan expanded when they got one of their merchant fleets expanded down here into Oceania, and started throwing some interest down in some of the weaker zones, just as a sort of counterpoint to Germany, which had established a control marker in the Bismarck Archipelago, and then threw some interest down in Kaiser Wilhelm's land and in whatever this is, the New Hebrides. Japan, in kind of a bold move, put a control marker down in Papua. That's not particularly valuable at a 3-point zone. You're only making $2 a turn with a control marker there. It would have been more profitable for them to just put an interest marker there. But again, this is sort of a challenge to Germany's attempt to claim all of these little oceanic zones here. The Brits, on one of the intervening turns since my last video, made Australia a dominion. They got the random event. Where is it? Australian pressure for dominion right here. If they didn't do it, they would have lost 5 victory points. So they spent the $60, made it a dominion. On the plus side, the fleets and troops that Britain keeps down here in Australia don't cost them anything to maintain, similar to how Canada works. So anytime it's expensive to maintain and create states or dominions in the game, but they do give you an advantage if you have troops abroad in the event that you're concerned about warfare. So Britain in this game always has to be concerned about going to war with someone. So And rather than losing 5 victory points like the U.S. did when the U.S. was unable to make Alaska a state on the first turn because they couldn't afford it, they lost 5 victory points. The British didn't want to have to deal with that, so went ahead and made Australia a dominion. Otherwise, this turn we have unrest in Korea, so Japan will have to squelch that. They have a protectorate there. They've also got the protectorate in Formosa. They expanded some influence down into Indochina. That's obviously going to be of concern to the French. Germany did expand their merchant fleet up into the North China Sea, so they threw some interest markers down into some imperial Chinese zones. It's going to raise Chinese tension or Chinese resentment, and we'll see if we get any sort of unrest or rebellion that breaks out. They're still not really close. I'm using the 3-die modified rules from Greg Kostikian for the Chinese rebellion, Chinese resentment index, which is supposed to lead to fewer Chinese rebellions, which is good that the powers don't have to deal with them that often, but it also gives the powers less of an entrance into these Chinese zones, which again, they can't put any protector markers down until there's some unrest or rebellion there. So I think that is where we're at. Trying to remember, I expanded Italy into the South Pacific with their merchant fleets. That's why Italy's now in Brazil over there. Italy does have some interest in Africa, but they've been shut out of their real game, which is to try and control those Mediterranean zones. So Russia and France have had their defensive treaty that since the first turn of the game that's been giving them 2 points a turn, so they've got a leg up there. Russia bought a lot of victory points on one of these turns, so that's something that Britain will have to look out for going forward. So anyway, that's the state of the world. Things looking relatively historical with, the Italians in East Africa, Germans down here. I think the Germans are also over here historically. Britain, obviously very active in South Africa in this period. It was a big issue for them. The random event this turn was a liberal victory in Britain, so they're not going to be able to spend much money on military this turn, and their colonial office budget was halved, so expect a quiet turn for Britain. Coming up, things proceeding pretty normally over here, a little weirdly here in Oceania with Japan's aggressive moves against Germany. Otherwise, largely historical stuff. We'll see where this turn goes. I haven't really given a lot of thought about where people are going. A lot of them have made their major moves already. For the case of Britain and France, it'll be tidying up their cross routes in Africa. For the Russians, more potential at some of these adjacent Chinese zones. And the Russians don't have a lot of options. Getting Anatolia was the big one for them, and maybe agitating against Britain somewhere down here. Although losing out on Persia didn't really help them a whole lot. Otherwise, the U.S. did manage to grab the Philippines. When Spain lost control of the Philippines, the U.S. obviously saw that as their way to move in there. Spain reduced to a interest marker when their influence marker that was left behind after their army was defeated here by the unrest. Nobody championed Spain against the United States in a Congress of Europe or in negotiations, so that left the U.S. free to move in and establish their own control marker in the Philippines. The only great power that was potentially interested in the Philippines was Germany, which at the time did not have does not have a South China Sea or a North Pacific merchant fleet in order to get troops to the Philippines. So, and the Philippines are a little confusing where they are on the map. You would think, oh, hey, why aren't they adjacent to Oceania? Why aren't they adjacent to the North China Sea? But you can see they're only adjacent to South China Sea, North Pacific. And I think that the North Pacific adjacency is really just to allow the U.S. To have the Philippines as a potential protectorate like they did historically, which is exactly what happened. Spain drops the ball, the U.S. moves in. That's their other potential in Cuba and Puerto Rico. They did have the option to declare war against Spain. I hesitated to do that with the United States on the yellow. They got the yellow journalism random event, which gave them a casus belli against Spain. I opted not to exercise that because at the time the U.S. fleet strength was not very high, the military strength was not very high, and I did not want to risk the United States getting into war with an actual European power, especially now that they have the Philippines. That would have been just something like a prime target for any European power looking to oust the United States from the Philippines in a war. So I did not take advantage of the casus belli from the yellow journalism to declare war on Spain, so that could still happen later in the game. I've spent the last turn building up fleet strength and military strength for the U.S. So that they would have a fighting chance in any war if indeed any major European power were to declare for Spain as a minor power against the United States. So anyway, just a little recap. At the end of, or at the start of the 1896 turn, we will press on.